Hi, so we're going to configure a load balancer with health probe and load balancing rule, and we are also going to create two VMs in different availability zones. So let's see a sample of what that would look like. So I was able to create something on Packet Tracer just to illustrate how a public load balancer would look like in the network. And what we're trying to do is we initially created a web server 001, which we can see here within the virtual network we created. And we also connected the web server to the internet through the public IP, which we issued to the virtual machine, the web server. So now we can see that there is a direct connection from the web server to that's 001 to the internet. So this time we are going to put a public load balancer between the internet and the new web servers we want to create. The idea is that when a client sends a request through the internet, it goes through the public load balancer, which is able to select web servers to reply back to the client. So the essence of the public load balancer is to improve network redundancy, so that in case a web server is unavailable or the path to the web server is faulty, other web servers can handle the request from the client. So it ensures that there is continual network availability in the case of a device failure, and to promote efficiency of reply from the servers. That means if any of these servers are down, the other one can quickly take over the request and get back to the client. So you can see that they are in different availability zones. We'll put server 2 in availability zone 1 and server 3 in availability zone 2. So what are availability zones? They contain several regions that have servers that use the same resources. So if, for instance, there is an issue in availability zone 1 where maybe the network is down or some of the resources are inadequate, the availability zone 2 can respond back to the client. So for now, we're just going to create the load balancer, and also we're going to create the web servers, and we're going to make sure that they connect with the internet. So we can see that the load balancer will have its public IP address that will connect to the internet, and the web servers would use the public IP of the load balancer, unlike the web server 01, which directly connected to the internet because it had its own public IP. So let's see how that is done. So I'm back on the Azure portal, and I'm going to go to the web server 01 which we created, and we can confirm that web server 01 has its direct public IP to the internet, so it's able to connect directly to the internet. So we're going to create a load balancer, and to do that we have to go to create resources. So we'll create a resource, and we want under networking here, networking, and we will scroll in and type here load balancer, and we can see the option given, and we'll simply create, and we'll use our current subscription, and we will still use the same resource group which we created for the previous web server 001. So we'll call it RG Lab 01, which is the one we'll select. Then the name of our load balancer, so we'll call it Lab 01 load balancer. and the region we are good with is US. The type, we want a public facing load balancer, and SQ standard, which is fine, and this is okay. Is regional. Public IP address, we are going to create a new one, and we're going to call it load balancer pip. Availability zone, we're going to call it zone redundant because it will interface with different zones. So this is fine. So review and create. So we have gotten the validation pass, so we'll need to create it. To create, and now we have completed our load balancer creation. So we'll go to the resource, and we'd like to start with the backend pools, which we have to configure. So we are going to add, because we have none yet, so we're going to add our backend pools, and we'll call the backend pool backend pool lab 01. And our virtual network is the one we created, where the virtual machines are located. So our backend pool configuration is fine. We choose NIC, and the IP version is IP version 4. So we're going to add that. We'll give it some time to be created, and right now we have our backend pool created, as we can see here, backend pool lab 01. And we want to go and set the health probes. So we need to add one, and we'll call our health probe lab 01. TCP is fine, port 80, which is okay, interval 5, and unhealthy threshold 2. So what this means is that the load balancer every 5 seconds is going to send a HTTP packet to the virtual machine to see that there is a connection that is efficient and it's active. But if the virtual machine doesn't respond back after 2 consecutive times, then the load balancer would tag the virtual machine as faulty and would give room to the other virtual machines to be used in its place. So we need the health probe to do that, so add that. And now our health probe has been created, so go to load balancing rules, and we're going to add a load balancing rule that will tie everything together, and we'll call it load balancing rule lab 1. And IP version 4 is fine. We'll use our load balancing front end, which is the IP address that's been created for us, and we use TCP. The port is going to be port 80. The backend port is also port 80. The backend pool is the backend pool which we created. That's the virtual machine. So we chose the virtual network where the virtual machines belong to. So once they are created, it will automatically connect to the virtual machines. So we choose the backend pool lab 01. The health probe, also the one we created, and session persistent is fine, and this okay, and I think every other thing is fine. So we'll add the load balancing rule and give it some time to be created. And now it's been created, so we'll go to create our virtual machines now. So to do that, we'll go to virtual machines, and we currently have our web server 001, so we'll create web server 002 and 003. So let me just make reference back to our diagram. We already have this existing, so we're going to create these two that will work with the load balancer. So the first one is going to use the same resource group, RG Lab 01. The virtual machine name, we'll call it web server 002. Region is fine. And now availability options, we're going to create an availability zone. And if you check the diagram, it's availability zone 1. So we'll choose 1. Ubuntu is fine. The size B1S is okay. And we'll use password. And password is Azure. Username is admin, Azure admin. Password, confirm that. And SSH is fine. So next, create disk, which is okay. Next, networking. So virtual network will still be VNet Lab 01. Subnet is fine, the same subnet. And public IP. So while public IP, we're going to choose none because we do not want the virtual machine to have a direct connection with the internet. We would like it to go through the load balancer. And now it says place this virtual machine behind an existing load balancing solution. So we'll click yes. And we have the Azure load balancer. And we want to choose the Lab 01 load balancer which we created. And also the backend pool is the Backend Pool Lab 01. So we'll click next, next, next. So our tags, will give it the name. Cost Center Lab 01. And we're going to review and create. And it says this is our subscription, which we're fine with that. So we're going to create. So we'll give it some time to create the virtual machine. And now our virtual machine has been created. So we're going to go ahead to create a virtual machine 003, the same way we created 002. So we'll go to virtual machines and we would see the web server 002. So we'll add virtual machine. So we'll do the same thing and we'll choose the resource group Lab 01 and the virtual machine name. Region is fine. Availability option. So we'll choose the availability zone 2 because from here we can see our web server 003 is in availability zone 2. So 2 is fine. Image is fine. Size is okay. Use the password and the password be public. So this is fine. Next. And size is okay. So we would use the same virtual network and the subnet is fine, and the public IP none because we do not want to connect directly with the internet. We like to go through the load balancer, and this is all fine. And load balancing, we want load balancing, so load balancer is what we'll choose, and the same, choose our Lab 01 load balancer and our backend pool to the same. So next, management, next, and next tags. So we'll create the tags name, and we clicked the review, and the virtual machine has passed the validation. So we're going to create. and is in progress. We'll just give it some time. So our virtual machine has been created. So we can go to resource, and we can see that the web server 003 is created. So let's do one more thing. We're going to ensure that HTTP access is permitted to the virtual machine, and we can also see now that the public IP address that web server 003 is using is that of the load balancer, and let me confirm that also of 002, and is also using the same public IP of the load balancer. And but when we check the 001, you can see is using a different public IP address, just like we have here. So these two web servers are using the load balancer's public IP, and this is using a different one directly to the internet. So let's check our load balancer, and we can see the one we created is currently active. And if we click on it, we can see the front end IP configuration is exactly the public IP used by the virtual machine. So the backend pools, we can see is used by web server 002 and 003 and is currently running. The health probes, we see it's active, and load balancing rule also active. So let's go back to the virtual machines, and let's see 002, and let's ensure that the inbound port rule is accepting HTTP, and now we can see any. So we'll create one, and any is fine, any, and the service we want is HTTP, ATTP fine, allow, and we'll give this a priority of 500, and we'll call this permit HTTP access. Just copy the same, and we'll add it, and we can refresh, and we can see now that it's added. So we'll go back to the virtual machine 003 and do the same thing. We'll go to networking, and we'll create inbound port rule for HTTP and do the same thing. HTTP, ATTP allow, give it 500. The same thing, permit HTTP access. Add, and we can also see it's been created here. So we have completed the task to create two virtual machines, which we have here, and also a load balancer, and we've connected the virtual machines to the load balancer, which is connected to the internet. So next we are going to put Apache web service in the two web servers, and we're going to put a front-end website on both of them, and we'll test the connection to see that it's working.